never had an affair before, and I'm not likely to have another one, not now. Well, I suppose technically I can't now that Billy's, well, you know. You have to have a husband to have an affair, don't you? But every time I hear the bells chime 4, I'm back in Florence. Even now, over 30 years on, I can still see that sunbeam creeping closer on the bedside table. Begin at the beginning. 1992. Billy had been given a trip to some conference in Italy, and it was coming up to my 30th. So he suggested a long weekend in Florence. Oh, I were dead excited. Well, if you'd hardly been out of Huddersfield all your life, Florence, well, it might as well have been Shangri-La. All I knew about Florence was what I'd seen in books. It has that famous statue of David standing there all cold and aloof, lost in his own thoughts. Florence just took me breath away. Oh, it was like God had right let rip. Colours I couldn't begin to explain or describe, and every building flaunting itself, shouting, "Look at me!" With arches and pillars and balconies all demanding attention. Not like Huddersfield Mills, stubbornly telling the wind and the rain to fuck off. Oh, the factories glowering by the canal. You don't get much call for balconies in Huddersfield in winter. Nor in summer, to be honest. Shh. But, to tell truth, it wasn't much of a birthday treat. Billy was permanently pissed, and when he wasn't, he was either working or sleeping. I felt like a piece of luggage. How could you go to Florence and not want to live and breathe every damn second? And one evening, when one of his colleagues got a bit fresh with me, and he seemed to think it was all a big joke, well, that were final straw. I waited until next morning. Then I gave it to him, both barrels. He were meant to be treating me proper, like, making me feel special. And I were feeling like I had to look after myself and getting none of the attention. Well, then he got a bit sharp with me, saying as how I didn't appreciate how hard he were working to bring the pennies in and how ungrateful I were. And before you knew it, he had slammed the door and I was sat on the bed crying. Well, I am not a one to feel sorry for myself for long, so I decided to pop out for some fresh air. And as the door shut behind me, I realised I'd locked myself out. Now, I could either go down to the hotel desk and act like a silly housewife who hadn't got 2 brain cells to rub together, or I could find Billy and look like I wasn't capable of looking after myself, and I'd have to apologise and all that. Then I thought, no. I'm here in Florence and I am not beholden to anyone in the world. I've got my purse on me, I've got a free day in the city, and I could be anyone I wanted to be. I could leave Mavis Potter crying on the hotel bed, waiting for someone to come and make everything better. Or I could go out and I could have an adventure. Yeah, I'm on. Hey. And I thought, well, Florence is famous for David, and maybe this Potter's going to go looking for him. Whether she speaks the lingo or not. With that decision, I felt a weight fall from me. Suddenly, I were alive. The air was, oh, I don't know, more transparent somehow. I could see things twice as clearly. I wasn't 30-year-old. I were two 15-year-olds strapped together. You know how those Italians walk with their shoulders back and that loose stride like they don't care tuppence? Well, that were me, wandering around like I owned place. Now, I were used to being a little housewife, but I thought, no, I'm having none of that. I told myself Italy were going to get the full bloody technicolor today. I were going to be like I were a 15 again, like I bloody knew everything. And I finally found that statue of David. It was glorious, so smooth and eternal, so perfect. Suddenly, there were a warm voice in me ear. You know, Michelangelo made his penis small so that men who asked him to make it would not feel threatened. Well, that were a bit fresh, but I wasn't gonna be flustered today. I turned round and there stood a lad of about 20 with cow eyes and a cheeky grin. And do you feel threatened, young man? I said in my most superior voice. Men would have quivered back in Huddersfield. But you know what he said? Well, of course you don't. But I'm going to tell you. Not threatened, no. But his balls, they are a lovely shape, no. Imagine Michelangelo and his chisel, so careful he must have been. And the image of that great sculpture kneeling at the foot of the statue, it must have been the last bit he tapped away. Surely. Carefully carving away, not wanting to risk anything. Imagine, one tap too hard and clunk, clunk, Bob's your auntie. And I laughed like a drain. And he laughed. He laughed like the sight of a middle-aged woman howling with laughter in the street of Florence was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. Hey, I got so close to David's testicles as I possibly could. I had no idea if they were lifelike. I mean, you don't look, do you? At that age, if I were that close, I'd have had my eyes tight shut. Well, I looked, and you know what? Whether testicles look like that or don't, I still don't know. But they were bloody amazing bits of marble. Lorenzo were his name. Well, that's what he told me. I weren't born yesterday, and his name could have been Michelangelo for all I knew. Soon he were acting like my personal private tour guide, and I were having the time of my life. We were in yet another glorious piazza when my tummy made the biggest rumble you've ever heard. Lorenzo laughed again. We are so close to my flat. I will make you lunch. Oh, I knew what he were after. I ain't daft. Mavis Potter would have made her excuses, said something about her husband and scuttled off back to her hotel room. But not me. Not today. I threw back my shoulders and I held my chin up high and I said in a voice I barely recognised, "And are you trying to seduce me, young man? Because I would like that very much." Couldn't believe I'd said that. Nor could he. His mouth twitched for a second. Then he smiled a deep, warm smile that made my knees go weak. Where a second before they'd been knocking like a giddy schoolgirl. He held my hand like we were silly lovers in a film. But I didn't give two brass knobs what people thought. I were having an adventure where I was going to swallow life whole and damn the consequences. His flat was small and neat, and lunch was probably delicious, but I couldn't taste a thing. I were hiding my hands to stop them from trembling, and I had a bit too much wine that was good for me. And you know, well, one thing led to another, and well, you don't need any details. I mean, you're not going to get any details. But when all you've had for 5 years is a Saturday night special 3-minute fumble and then 3 hours of snoring, you know what? To have a man who actually cares. I lost count of the number of times that you know, the number of times well, I will just say that even with my glasses off, I knew why Lorenzo didn't feel threatened by that statue. I don't know what happened to Mavis Potter that afternoon. She'd gone, and she were replaced by this slapper. This other woman just threw herself into it like all the life she were ever gonna have were that afternoon. And Brannick, she were a whirlwind. She was saying things I'd never say, and God got quite a lot of calls that afternoon, I can tell you. I hope he didn't answer any of them. I'm not sure he would have approved. Then it were afterwards. The sun were creeping out on tiptoe, and a sunbeam stretched itself casually across the room. Lorenzo sighed and closed his eyes. A nearby church rang 4 times, deep and solemn. Without opening his eyes, he murmured, 4 chimes, 1 for each time you... And I put my hands over his mouth. I didn't want to hear that word out loud. It were naughty. He folded me into his body and I grasped every moment, memorising his breathing, watching his chest rise and fall, imprinting the sensation of his hairy chest and my breast against his taut stomach muscles next to my wobbly tummy. I wanted to be certain that I would never, ever forget this feeling of being desired. I hadn't thought of Billy once, not once. But as Lorenzo slept, I watched that sunbeam cross his bedside table, creeping towards me as the afternoon waned, like my real life trying to catch up with me. Finally, I heard the bells chime 5. Billy would be back from work soon. Lorenzo, I whispered, I have to go. 5 o'clock. He stretched himself. Just a once more? And he kissed my neck. His hands ran over me, like Michelangelo running his rule over David. Only I hope he didn't do to David what Lorenzo did to me next. That would change the way I think of that statue forever. Even as we dressed, I knew I'd made a mistake. Well, I say mistake, but, well, it was right hard to think of it as a mistake, really. I was just hoping that the stubble hadn't given me a rash on my lips, or anywhere else. He insisted on writing down my address. Oh yes, young man, I thought. Make it look like you'll keep in touch. I know I'm just another conquest, but thank you for going through the motions. I got back to the hotel to a bombshell. Billy was tearing his hair out, wondering where I were. No mobile phones back then. It turned out that he'd had a phone call from Manchester. His dad had died. Before we could say jump, we were on a flight back to London, to England and Manchester and Huddersfield. And then we were a humble tumble of arranging the funeral, writing to relatives, dealing with banks and solicitors. Billy took it real hard. He threw himself into his work like he were trying to hide or forget something. I kept my little secret, and I suppose I didn't help either. But he were hard making effort when he were being so difficult. month later, the letters started. Beautiful handwritten letters about how much he missed me, how much he longed to hear my beautiful voice. Beautiful voice? With my accent? He must have had cloth ears, that muppet. I didn't reply. I wasn't going to make things better by getting his hopes up, was I? Well, to tell the truth, I replied to one or two. I couldn't help it. I'm only human. He wrote poems that didn't quite make sense because his English was a bit not English, like he'd swallowed the wrong dictionary. Oh, but I loved them poems. I didn't dare to keep them. I burnt them all. I watched all those pretty words, all those thoughts and dreams. I watched them disappear in smoke up the chimney. And a little bit of me went up in smoke with them. After about a year, the letters suddenly stopped. I were relieved. I kept thinking Billy might get to the post before me one morning and open one. I wondered what happened. I like to think of some beautiful senorita. Is that the right word? Anyway, stealing his heart and the two of them making beautiful babies together. And him insisting on calling his daughter Mavis. And always getting teased in school and his wife never understanding why he insisted on her having an English name. I hope that's what happened. Sometimes I think of other things and then I shake my head and I get rid of them thoughts and well, that's that. When Billy died, I left that big old house and I found this little cottage in a village where nobody knew me and nobody knew Billy and nobody would guess about Lorenzo. But the main thing is I'm just 200 yards from the local church. Every afternoon at 4 o'clock, I listen to them bells chime 4. One for each time I still blush when I think of it. I pour myself a glass of wine and I sit there for an hour and I wait for the bells to chime 5. That sunbeam crept closer, but it never reached me. So I suppose I am still being unfaithful to Billy, if truth be told. But I am being faithful to the first time that I really heard those bells chime.